The light in the chamber was a liar. It spilled from high, Gothic arches in soft, golden pools, gilding the marble floor and the edges of the great stained glass windows that depicted scenes of impossible piety and heroism. To the pilgrims who shuffled through in awed silence, it was the light of the divine. To Remigus, curator-fabricant of the Segmentum Pacificus archives, it was the careful, calculated output of lumen globes maintained by a team of servo skulls. The truth of this place, like all truths in the Imperium, was a thing layered in ritual, obfuscation, and deliberate, beautiful falsehood. He stood before the central reliquary, a crystal spire twice his height. Within, suspended in a viscous, amber-hued preservative, rested a simple, unadorned iron circlet. Its surface was pitted by time, stained by something dark that could have been rust or could have been something else entirely. This was the diadem of Saint Elanor, the first among saints, the beacon of the early crusade. The placard beneath it, inscribed in High Gothic, told the sanctioned tale. By her faith alone, the demonic horde was turned to ash upon the plains of Calthos. By her sacrifice, the world was cleansed. Her purity ignited the flame of the Imperium's soul. Pilgrims wept as they read it. Remigus felt only the cold weight of the data slate in his hands. His life's work, a cross-referencing of planetary compliance records from the early 31st millennium, had revealed a discrepancy, a ghost in the machine. The world listed as Calthos Secundus in the hagiographies did not appear in the territorial logs of the Crusade fleet Solaris for the cited date. Instead, his search algorithms, scraping the grimy underbelly of fragmented fleet manifests and damaged supply inventories, had found another name, referenced once and then scrubbed from all subsequent records: Sethrys. The authorization from his superior, Magister Historiographus Valdus, had been terse, sealed with a wax imprint of a key crossed by a sword. It granted him access to the Penitential Vaults, the sublevels of the archive where information was not stored but imprisoned. The lift descended for a long time, the golden light above vanishing, replaced by the stark, pallid glare of lumen strips. The air grew cold and carried the scent of ozone, rust, and the faint metallic tang of forgotten fear. The vault door was bulkhead thick, etched with wards of silencing and containment. It opened with a sigh of equalizing pressure. The chamber beyond was not large. It was lined with rows of dark, inert data stacks, their machine spirits long since entombed in solemn cyberdogma. At the center of the room, on a lone pedestal, sat a single black crystalline data slug. There were no labels, only a numeric designation: 001 Alpha. Remigus's hands did not shake as he slotted the slug into the portable reader he had brought. He was a servant of logic, of the empirical truth. The screen flickered to life, casting a sickly green glow on his face. The files were not text. They were audio-visual logs, tagged with fleet identification markers and a date stamp that placed them 63 standard years before the official founding of the Imperial cult on Terra. The first images were grainy, monochrome, shaking with the impact of distant artillery. It showed a battlefield, but not the glorious, ordered lines of Imperial might. It was chaos. Human soldiers in makeshift armor, their faces gaunt with terror, fired las rifles into a swirling, amorphous horror of flesh and shadow at the edge of a shattered hive city. The sound was a cacophony of screams, the crackle of energy weapons, and a deep, chittering roar that seemed to claw at the mind. Then, a figure walked into frame. She was tall, clad in the practical, unadorned body glove and light carapace of a civilian militia officer. Her hair was cropped short. There was no halo of light, no glowing nimbus. She carried a standard-issue las pistol, but it was not raised. She was simply walking, her mouth moving, speaking words the audio pickup could not catch over the din of war. The soldiers near her faltered, then turned to look. The swirling horror at the edge of the city hesitated. The recording jumped. A new scene, a command bunker. The same woman, Elanor, the file's metadata named her, stood before a hardened Imperial Army colonel, her face streaked with grime and blood that was not her own. Her expression was not one of beatific serenity, it was one of profound, soul-crushing exhaustion and a fury that burned cold. "You cannot contain it with artillery, Colonel," she said, her voice surprisingly clear, resonant even through the scratchy recording. "It feeds on the fear, on the death. Your shells only give it more to consume." The colonel, a brute of a man with a scar across his throat, snarled. The Psycho Core is dead. The Astartes are 3 systems away. My orders are to hold the line with what I have.
What you have is a planet slowly being digested by a nightmare. Elanor shot back, her composure cracking. I can feel it. Its hunger, its thoughts. It is not a beast to be slain. It is a pattern of belief given form. It believes we are afraid. We must show it something else. And what would that be? Civilian, the colonel sneered. Elanor looked at her hands, then back at the hololithic display of the dying city. Her eyes held a terrifying resolve. We must show it we are not afraid to die for each other. The recording ended abruptly. Remiga stared at the blank screen, the silence of the vault pressing in on him. This was not the story of a saint. This was the after-action report of a Xenos incursion, or something worse. There was no divine intervention, only a desperate woman and a terrible, logical proposition about the nature of the enemy. He reached to unplug the slug, his mind reeling with implications that threatened the very foundations of the shrine above him. The door to the vault hissed open. Magister Valdez stood there, but he was not alone. 2 figures flanked him, clad in long, gray robes, their faces hidden deep within cowls. Their presence was an absence. The light from the corridor seemed to bend away from them. In their gloved hands they held ornate, snub-nosed pistols, their barrels silently tracking to point at Remiga's chest. Valdez's face, usually one of scholarly detachment, was pale, his lips a thin, bloodless line. Curator Fabricant Remigas, he said, his voice too loud in the quiet. You were authorized to confirm a date discrepancy. You were not authorized to access the primary log. Remigas slowly stood, keeping his hands visible. Magister, the log, it contradicts everything. Saint Elanor didn't perform a miracle. She identified a weakness in a warp-based entity. This is tactical data, not theology. One of the gray-robed figures spoke, its voice a dry, papery whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. There is no difference, it said. Faith is the Imperium's tactic. The truth is a weapon too sharp for mortal hands. You have held it. Valdez looked stricken, unable to meet Remiga's eyes. The narrative is a shield. Remigas, the story of the saint, the divine light. It is what holds the dark back. The raw truth you just witnessed, it is the dark. The other robed figure raised his pistol. The narrative must be protected. You have seen the foundational flaw. You have seen that the first saint was not touched by the God Emperor's light, but by the shadow's edge. That knowledge is a pathogen. It must be contained. Remiga's mind, trained for data retrieval and analysis, raced. The vault had no other exit. The Data-Slug in the reader was the only copy. The truth of Saint Elanor, a truth of empathy and sacrificial logic in the face of a sighted predator, was about to die with him in this sterile, silent tomb. He took a slow step back, his hand brushing the pedestal. And if the narrative is built on a lie, he asked, his own voice steady now, colder than the vault air, then it is a stronger lie, the whispering figure replied, finger tightening on the trigger. And you are its latest martyr. The shot never came. It was not a sound of mercy, but one of catastrophic interruption. A deep, resonant boom echoed from somewhere far above. A sound felt in the bones more than heard. The vault floor trembled. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The lumens flickered, plunging the room into a strobing nightmare of light and shadow. In that split second of chaos, Remigas acted not with bravery, but with the ingrained instinct of an archivist. His hand closed around the black Data-Slug and yanked it from the reader, pocketing it in the inner lining of his robe as he threw himself to the floor. The gray-robed figures, their focus broken, spin towards the door, weapons tracking unseen threads in the corridor. Valdis cried out, a wordless sound of fear. Alarms began to blare, a strident, pulsing shriek that cut through the muffled silence of the vaults. Red emergency lumens ignited, washing the room in the color of blood and warning. The sanctuary, Valdis shouted over the din, his scholarly facade utterly shattered. They're breaching the upper sanctuary. The whispering figure turned its shrouded head back towards Remicus, a sliver of pale, scorching visible in the hellish light. That data, you will surrender it. Its voice was no longer a whisper, but a blade of command. Another tremor, heavier, a rending sound of stone, and plastic collapsing echoed down the lift shaft. The attack was not a subtle inquiry, it was an excision. This vault is compromised, the other gray agent stated, its tone leaving no room for argument. The curator fabricant is now a secondary concern. The primary site must be secured. The narrative must hold.
They moved as one, flowing past Valdis and into the shuddering corridor, leaving the Magister staring after them. Then at Remicus, who was slowly getting to his knees. The pilgrims, Valdis mumbled, his eyes wide with horrified realization. Thousands are in the shrine. Remicus saw his chance. The agents were gone, their duty to the living narrative above, outweighing the silencing of a single curator. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. Valdis blocked the doorway, not with menace, but with a bewildered, pathetic confusion. Remicus, you can't. The truth, it will unravel everything. What is happening up there, Magister? Remicus demanded, his voice sharp. What is so important that it requires leveling a holy shrine to protect? Valdis shook his head, tears of fear and guilt brimming in his eyes. They said it was impossible. They said the seal would hold for eternity. But the Psychers, the astropaths in the spire, for weeks they've been screaming about an echo from the past, a ghost in the warp. It's her. It has to be. The resonance of her act. It's drawn something back to Sethrys. The name was a key turning in the lock of Remicus's mind. Sethrys, the ghost world from the manifest. The true site of Eleanor's stand. You knew, Remicus breathed. You knew the official history was a lie. You curated the lie. It is not a lie, Valdis insisted, a desperate fervor in his voice. It is the perfected form. The messy, terrifying truth of that war was refined, distilled into a symbol. The iron circlet up there doesn't represent a militia commander's helmet, it represents divine will. Don't you see? The truth is too complex, too frightening. It offers no comfort, only doubt. The Imperium runs on certainty. Remicus, on faith. Your Data-Slug holds the seed of a heresy that could make the Age of Apostasy look like a minor theological dispute. A colossal explosion from above punctuated his words. The ceiling groaned. A crack snaked across the marble floor of the vault. The sound of distant screaming, multiplied by thousands, filtered down a terrible, faint chorus of agony. They are burning the evidence, Valdis said, his shoulders slumping. The agents, they won't let a single stone of the true story remain. They will let the shrine fall, let the pilgrims die, and from the ashes, a new, purer tale will be built. One with no contradictions. The moral calculus of it stunned Remicus, the sacrifice of thousands to maintain a story. The truth of St. Elanor was not just dangerous for its content, but for its nature. It was not a top-down miracle, but a bottom-up sacrifice. It spoke of a power born from collective human empathy, not divine bestowal. In an Imperium built on rigid hierarchy and the unquestionable grace of the God Emperor, such an idea was tectonic. He pushed past the broken Magister. Then the truth dies here today, one way or another, with me or with everyone up there. He ran into the corridor. The emergency lumens cast long, dancing shadows. The lift was a twisted wreck of metal, its shaft glowing with heat from the conflagration above. Service stairs, narrow and rarely used, spiraled upwards nearby. The air grew hotter, thicker with each step, carrying the stench of promethium, ozone, and charred meat. The sounds of battle were now clear. The crisp report of bolt weapons, the searing crack of lasgun volleys, and beneath it all, a sound that made the data in his pocket feel like a block of ice. It was a low, melodic humming, threaded with voices that were not voices, a psychic resonance that vibrated in his teeth. It was the same chittering roar from the recording, but evolved, refined, remembering. He emerged not into the grand nave, but into a side chapel dedicated to some minor saint. The beautiful lie was being violently dismantled. A hole had been blasted in the vaulted ceiling. Through it, he could see the night sky, stained orange by fire. The once pristine marble was littered with rubble and bodies, pilgrims in simple robes, shrine guards in shattered carapace, and the still smoking corpses of the Grey Agents, their robes torn, their specialized weapons lying useless beside them. Across the nave, near the shattered reliquary, the battle raged. The remaining Grey Agents and a squad of shocked but determined Astra Militarum troopers from the planet's PDF had formed a firing line. They were not shooting at an invading army, they were shooting at the light. It poured from the broken crystal spire, from the very air around the iron circlet, which now hovered, spinning slowly, in the center of the maelstrom. But it was not the golden benevolent light from the lumen globes. This was a searing, painful silver white, a light that etched shadows onto the walls with razor clarity. And within the light, forms shifted the terrified faces of long-dead militia, the snarling visage of the colonel, the swirling, impossible geometry of the warp entity. And at the center, a figure of luminous agony, Elanor, not a saint, but a woman caught in the feedback loop of her own momentous, terrible decision, her mouth open in a silent scream. There was the hum shaking the temple. It was not an attack, it was an echo, a traumatic scar on reality, replaying itself with the circlet as the focal point. The miracle of Calthos of Sethrys had never ended. It had been bottled, sanctified, and buried under 60 centuries of prayer. Those prayers had not fortified it, they had pressurized it. And now, something from that long ago war, attracted by the psychic resonance, or perhaps a part of it all along, had returned to open the wound. A Grey Agent was lifted into the air, his body dissolving into motes of silver light that flowed back into the vortex. A guardsman fired a missile. It passed through the luminous form of the colonel and detonated against a far wall, killing 3 pilgrims who had been hiding there. Remigus crouched behind a toppled pew, the Data-Slug burning a hole in his pocket. Valdis was right. This was not a truth that could be simply told. It was a psychic event, a mimetic hazard. Witnessing it was to be consumed by it, to become part of the echoing trauma. The agents were trying to contain it by destroying the focal point, the circlet, but their weapons were useless against the solidified memory. He understood then, with chilling clarity, what the original act must have been. Elanor hadn't channeled the Emperor's power. She had done something far more profound and terrifying. She had focused the collective emotion of her people, not just their fear, but their latent love, their desperate will to protect one another, and had reflected it back at the warp entity, a creature that fed on fear. She had weaponized humanity's fragile light against the abyss, and the backlash had seared the event into the very matter of the circlet and the space around it. The humming changed pitch. The swirling images coalesced, focusing on the hovering diadem. The luminous ghost of Elanor turned its head, its eyes, pools of solid light, swept across the carnage and settled not on the soldiers, not on the agents, but on him, on the man holding the unvarnished record of her pain. A voice spoke in his mind, not a whisper, but a clear, desperate feminine tone frayed at the edges by 6,000 years of silent screaming. You see, you have the before. Show me the before. I have forgotten what we fought for. The voice was not an assault, it was an imploration. It filled Remigus's skull, not with the weight of divine command, but with the unbearable lightness of absolute despair. It carried the memory of last burns on city walls, the coppery taste of fear, the scent of a world dying not in fire, but in a slow, psychic suffocation. He saw, for a fleeting second, not the grand tragedy of a saint, but the simple, devastating view from a militia trench. A child's doll half buried in mud, a shared canteen of stale water, a friend's hand gripping a rifle with white-knuckled terror. I have forgotten what we fought for. The luminous figure extended a hand of condensed light towards him. The Grey agents saw the movement and reacted. A storm of hellgun fire and specialized side-dampening bolts ripped through the space between Remigus and the reliquary, not aimed at him, but at the connection they perceived. The bolts flared and died in the silver glow. The hellgun beams refracted wildly, one shearing off the head of a stone cherub, another cutting a fleeing pilgrim in half. The psychic echo recoiled, the images within it flickering the smiling face of a militiaman dissolving into a rictus of pain, the swirling warp entity swelling with renewed hunger. The humming rose into a shriek of rekindled trauma. The agent's intervention had not severed the link. It had reminded the echo of the violence that followed its greatest moment. No, you do not see, you never saw. The voice was no longer a single woman's. It was a chorus of the dead, a cacophony of Sethrys' final hours. The silver light pulsed outwards in a wave. It did not shatter stone or melt metal. It did something worse. Where it touched the living, it imprinted. A PDF trooper froze, his weapon clattering to the ground. He clutched his helmet, a guttural sob wrenching from his throat. The light. It's in the trenches. It's singing. Make it stop singing. He was reliving a frontline panic attack from a war 6 millennia gone. A Grey agent, more resilient, staggered back, his cowl falling away to reveal a face etched with intricate cybernetic wards. Silver light crackled over the metal, overloading the sacred circuits. His eyes, one human, one red-lensed bionic, went wide with a horror not his own. The Colonel, he's ordering the retreat. He's leaving them. He's leaving her. The agent screamed, the professional facade obliterated by the raw, borrowed memory of betrayal. The echo was not attacking. It was infecting. It was broadcasting its terminal memory into any mind unprotected by absolute blind faith. And in this shattered temple, faith was in critically short supply. Remigus huddled behind the pew, the Data-Slug a hard, cold knot against his chest. The voice's request echoed in the silence of his own mind. Show me the before. The before was in the slug. The messy, human moments before the legend solidified. The arguments, the fear, the desperate logical plan born of empathy rather than revelation. To show it would be to interface the raw, historical record with this raw, psychic scar. It could be the key to calming the echo, to letting the trauma finally complete its cycle and fade, or it could be pouring promethium on a plasma fire, merging two incompatible truths into an apocalyptic paradox. Another option presented itself. He could flee. The side chapel had a shattered processional door leading to the outer colonnades. He could run, preserve the dangerous truth, perhaps die later at the hands of the Grey agents, but keep the seed of heresy alive. A scholar's choice. He looked out at the nave turned abattoir. The shimmering form of Elanor was dimmer now, fraying at the edges as it relived the Colonel's betrayal and the entity's counterattack. The parasitic memory was consuming its own source, trapped in a loop of pain. The remaining humans, agents, soldiers, and cowering pilgrims were either catatonic or firing wildly, adding new deaths to the old nightmare. He was an archivist. His purpose was not to create narratives, but to preserve records, even monstrous ones, even suicidal ones. Gritting his teeth, Remigus stood. He ignored the shouted commands from the last coherent Grey agent. He stepped out from cover and into the open floor, the silver light washing over him. It was cold, like the void between stars. It did not seek to invade his mind. It had already asked its question. It waited. He held up the black Data-Slug. The portable reader was back in the vault, destroyed. But this was not a matter of mere data transfer. This was about resonance, about offering a mirror to a broken memory. "I have it," he shouted, his voice thin against the psychic hum. "I have the before, the council in the bunker, the map of the Hive's western spire, the names of your squad Kalen, Vorix, the girl with the medic kit, Sona. I have the moment you decided to walk out." The luminous figure shuddered. The swirling images of demonic forms and screaming soldiers slowed, receded. The focus narrowed on him, the light intensifying until it was all he could see. The physical world, the shattered temple, the dead, the war fell away. He was in a bubble of silent, argent luminescence. Before him, the figure of Elanor solidified, no longer a giant of light, but life-sized, translucent, her features etched with an exhaustion so deep it was cosmic. She looked at the slug in his hand, then at his face. Her expression was one of profound confusion. They said it was a miracle. They said he spoke to me. Her mental voice was a whisper now, intimate and broken.
I heard only the screaming. I felt only the need to make it stop. For them, for Kallan, who was so scared, for Sona, who kept trying to save everyone. It wasn't a miracle, Remidus said, the historian in him overriding his terror. It was strategy. You understood the enemy's nature. You used the only weapon you had left, the certainty of your sacrifice. You gave them a reason to be unafraid. I gave them a reason to die, she corrected, grief flooding the connection. And it worked. It reflected back. It burned the thing away, but it burned us too. It burned me, and then, the kernel, the stories, the light. Her form flickered, threatening to dissolve back into the chaotic echo. Remidus took a step forward, an absurd gesture of comfort towards a millennial-old ghost. The story is a cage, he said. They took your truth and forged it into a key for a different lock. They used you to build a wall of faith, but your truth was a bridge. You built it out of their courage, not your own. He closed his eyes and did the only thing he could. He recited the dry, tactical data from the log, the words stripped of devotional clause. At 2347 local, militia commander Elanor Vant proposed Operation Soul Mirror. Hypothesis: the entity is a psychic vortex feeding on patterns of fear and despair. Proposed counter: a synchronized, psychologically prepared charge from the Western Spire, focusing not on attack, but on projecting a unified emotional state of defiant sacrifice, thereby creating a mimetic reflection to destabilize the entity's core. Probability of success, estimated 8%. Probability of total unit loss, estimated 96%. Proposal was seconded by Sergeant Kallan. Vote carried. As he spoke the clinical, terrible words, the silver light around them changed. The cold, painful glare softened. The humming faded to a murmur. The image of Elanor solidified further. He saw the grime on her face, the tear in her body glove at the shoulder, the stark humanity of her. She was weeping silver tears. Kallan, she breathed. He voted yes. He was so scared, but he voted yes. For Sona, for the others and the lower hab. You remembered, Remidus whispered. I remember the before, she said. A sense of immense, settling peace began to emanate from her. The violent echoes at the edges of their bubble faded, the images receding like a tide. The circle hovering in the physical world beyond their space began to slow its spin. The story, the golden lie, it was so heavy, it smothered the real faces. Thank you. The light began to gently dim. The connection started to fade, but just before it broke, her eyes, now clear and focused, locked onto his. But they will not thank you. They need the cage. They fear the bridge. You have armed the past. Now you must survive the future. The silver light imploded with a soft, sighing sound. Silence. It was the most profound sound Remidus had ever heard. It rang in his ears after the psychic tempest, a vacuum filled only by the crackle of distant flames, the moans of the wounded, and the drip of broken stone conduits. He stood alone in the center of the ravaged nave. The silver maelstrom was gone. The iron circle lay on the scorched marble where it had fallen, inert, just a piece of old, pitted metal. The air no longer hummed with borrowed trauma. It was just air, thick with smoke and death. The piece lasted for 3 heartbeats. A boot crunched on rubble. Remidus turned slowly. The last gray agent stood 20 paces away, his helm raised and steady. The man's face was a mask of blood from a gash on his forehead, his cyber-warded eye dark and dead, but his living eye burned with a fervor that was entirely his own. Drop the Xenos artifact, Archivist, the agent growled, his voice hoarse. Remidus looked down at the black Data-Slug, still clutched in his hand. It was warm. It is not Xenos, it is Imperial. The truth. Truth is what protects humanity, the agent snapped, taking a step forward. Behind him, 2 surviving PDF troopers shuffled into view, their weapons lifting shakily towards Remidus. They were not under psychic influence anymore. They were under orders. The narrative had reasserted its control. You have interfaced with a warp entity. You have been compromised. The Data-Slug is a vector. handed over for purification? Purification meant destruction, the final erasure of Sethrys and the woman who was not a saint. Remiga's mind, still echoing with Elanor's final warning, understood the event was over, but the war was not. The war for the past was eternal. He thought of running, but his body was leaden with exhaustion. He thought of arguing, but he saw the absolute conviction in the agent's eye. This man had seen his comrades disintegrate, had felt the edges of the echo's despair, and had interpreted it all through the only lens he had, the lens of demonic assault and heresy. To him, Remigas was no longer a curator.
He was a heretic who had communed with the enemy and stilled its rage, a feat only possible, in his theology, through corruption. She wasn't a demon, Remigas said, his voice flat. She was a ghost, a memory. We helped her remember, and she left. Demons lie, the agent stated, finger tightening on the trigger. Final warning, the slug. A new voice cut through the smoke, weak but sharp. Stand down, agent. Magister Valdis limped from the ruins of a side altar. His robes were torn, his face ashen. He held no weapon, only his authority, which seemed as fragile as glass. The crisis is contained. The phenomenon has ceased. Curator Fabricant Remigas acted to preserve this facility. The agent's gun did not waver. With all due respect, Magister Historiographus, your jurisdiction ends where operational security begins. This man handled a mimetic hazard. He is a carrier. The artifact is the source. Both must be cleansed. By the authority of the Ordo, by the authority of the Adeptus Administratum, Segmentum Pacificus Archive Primus, this is a matter of historical record. Valdis's voice gained a desperate strength. He moved to stand slightly between the agent and Remigas, a pathetic, brave shield. You have done your duty. The shrine is secure. The physical threat is gone. The remaining threat is one of interpretation. And that falls to my ordos. A tense silence stretched. The agent's gaze flickered from Valdis's desperate face to the inert circlet, to Remigas. The calculus was changing. The immediate, apocalyptic threat was over. Killing an archivist and a magister in cold blood, while possible, would now require paperwork, justifications, a new narrative to be built. And the agent's superiors might not appreciate such blunt instruments being used after the fact, with no tangible warp spawn to show for it. With a slow, deliberate motion, the agent lowered his hellgun a fraction. The artifact, he repeated, but the demand was now a negotiation. Valdis turned slightly, meeting Remigas's eyes. His gaze was a complex map of guilt, fear, and a sliver of returning scholarly pride. He gave an almost imperceptible nod towards Remigas's closed hand. Remigas understood. It was not a surrender, it was a gambit. He took a slow step forward, extending his hand, the black slug resting on his palm. But as the agent reached for it, Remigas's fingers twitched, and the slug tumbled, not into the agent's glove, but onto the cracked floor between them. It shattered. The black crystalline casing split into a dozen pieces. A wisp of ozone, or perhaps something more ephemeral, sighed out of it and dissipated. The data within, the raw logs of Sethrys, the voice of Colonel, the tactical briefings, gone. Not just deleted, but physically destroyed. The agent stared at the fragments, then at Remigas, his expression unreadable. A regrettable accident, Valdis said swiftly, his voice firm. In the chaos, the artifact was unstable, perhaps damaged by the psychic event. A total loss. The agent finally holstered his weapon. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a cold professional assessment. A total loss, he echoed. He looked around the cathedral, at the bodies, at the broken reliquary, at the scarred but standing walls. The narrative of the shrine will require updating. A tragic attack by unknown heretical forces, repulsed by the faith of the pilgrims and the courage of its guardians. The relic was damaged but preserved. The sanctity of the site remains. He was already writing the report in his head, a clean, usable lie. One that maintained the useful fiction of St. Elanor while burying the night's events under a layer of conventional violence. Of course, Valdis said, bowing his head slightly, we will provide full archival support for the updated records. The agent gave a final lingering look at Remigas, then turned and strode away, barking orders to the PDF troopers to begin securing the perimeter and sorting the dead. When they were alone in the ruins, Valdis sagged against a broken column. He looked 10 years older. "You saved the truth," he murmured, so low only Remigus could hear. "I destroyed it," Remigus corrected, staring at the shards. "You memorized it," Valdis said, tapping his own temple. "I saw your face while you were reciting it to her. You didn't just read it, you ingested it. An archivist's final duty. The record is gone, the record keeper remains." Remigus said nothing. The weight of the ingested truth felt immense inside him. He knew now he would dream of Sethrys, of Kaelin and Sona, of a woman who chose to be a mirror instead of a sword. "What will happen now?" Remigus asked. "We will rebuild the shrine," Valdis said, gazing at the hole in the ceiling where the false stars now shone. "The circlet will be placed in a new, more magnificent reliquary. The story will be retold with a new, thrilling chapter about heresy and defense. It will be more popular than ever." He looked at Remigus, his eyes weary. "And you will be reassigned, somewhere distant, somewhere quiet. A planetary archive on the edge of nowhere. Your expertise in data recovery will be noted and quietly forgotten. It was not a punishment, it was an exile, a gentle, permanent silencing. And you, Magister?" Valdis smiled, a thin, brittle thing. "I will remain, to curate the new lies, to ensure they are strong and beautiful, and keep the dark at bay." He pushed himself upright. "Go home tonight, Remigus. Burn your notes. Forget the name Sethrys. Remember only the story of Saint Elanor. It is the story that keeps this world and a million others from despair." Even, he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, "if it is built on the bones of a better one." Remigus watched him walk away, a ghost in the ruins of his own conscience. He looked down once more at the shattered Data-Slug, then at the simple iron circlet lying a few feet away. He did not pick it up. He turned and walked towards the shattered processional door, stepping out into the cold night air. Above, the sky was clearing of smoke. On the horizon, the first hints of dawn tinged the sky the color of old blood and new gold. The sounds of rescue vehicles and Imperial enforcers began to fill the air, replacing the silence. The machine was already repairing itself. He walked, without destination, the only living soul who carried the full, terrible, beautiful weight of what had truly happened on a forgotten world called Sethrys. He was no longer just a curator. He was an archive of one, a tomb for a truth that could never be spoken, yet could never be erased. In his mind, perfectly preserved, the voice of Elanor Vant, who was not a saint, echoed one last time, not with despair, but with a quiet, enduring solidarity. "You have armed the past. Now you must survive the future." The future, he knew, would be a long, silent war. The shuttle to the orbital dock was a featureless grey Arvus lighter, its interior smelling of stale, recirculated air and ozone. Remigus sat on a hard alloy bench, a single small case at his feet containing the sum of his permitted worldly possessions, 2 changes of robes, a data slate wiped of all personal notations, a primer on the doctrinal history of the Agrippinar sector, and his formal letter of reassignment. Through the small, thick viewport, the shrine world fell away, its continents resolving into a bruised patchwork of green and brown. The great crater where the central cathedral had stood was just a faint smudge from this altitude, already being smoothed over by the immense, indifferent machinery of the Imperial Restoration. Within a standard year, it would be a gleaming new basilica, its tragedy canonized into yet another verse of Imperial endurance. He had not been present for the debriefings. The Grey Agents, their numbers mysteriously replenished, had handled all interrogations of the surviving staff and pilgrims. The official narrative, as Valdis had predicted, was already hardening into dogma. A vile cult of chaos undivided, seeking to blaspheme the sacred relic, had launched a cowardly attack. The faith of the masses and the heroic last stand of the shrine's guardians had broken their foul sorceries, though not without tragic loss. The relic had been damaged, but was being lovingly restored. Saint Eleanor's light, it was said, had burned brighter in defiance. A perfect story, clean, inspirational. A bulwark against despair. Remigus closed his eyes not to sleep, but to visit the archive in his mind. It was all there, etched in perfect, painful clarity. Not just the data from the slug, but the sensory overload from the echo, the taste of Sethrys' acidic rain, The gritty texture of the bunker's sand table dust, the specific pitch of Kaelin's nervous laugh. He could recall the exact casualty figures from the Western Spire push, the serial numbers of the lasguns issued to Eleanor's squad. This was his penitence, to remember everything and to say nothing. The shuttle docked with a metallic thud. The journey to his new post would involve 3 transfers: a bloated system freighter to the Mandeville Point, a chartist captained by a man who asked no questions, and finally a patrol monitor of the Imperial Navy delivering administrative personnel to the frontier. His new home was to be the Archive Monastery of Solitude, on the dead moon of Lyra III, in the Scarus sector. Its official purpose was the collation of astropathic drift data and mining surveys. Its unofficial purpose, Remigus knew, was to be a oubliette for inconvenient knowledge and the people who possessed it. A silent, cold end. As he walked the grimy, bustling corridors of the orbital station, a figure detached itself from the shadow of a cargo loader. It was Valdis. The Magister looked diminished out of his formal robes, dressed in the plain garb of a mid-level Administratum functionary. His eyes darted nervously. "A brief word, Curator," Valdis said, falling into step beside him, not making eye contact. "To see you off." "You took a risk coming here," Remigus said, his voice neutral. "The agents are occupied writing their triumph. They have no further interest in you, so long as you are gone." Valdis pressed a small, sealed cylinder into Remigus's hand. It was warm, a parting gift. "For your studies." Remigus made to open it, but Valdis's hand closed over his. "Not here, not ever, in the light. It is context." They stopped at the entrance to the freighter's embarkation queue. The din of shouted manifests, barking servitors, and revving loaders created a curtain of noise around them. "The narrative is secure," Valdis said, speaking quickly. "But narratives have foundations. The incident revealed a flaw in ours, a fragility. We built the story of the first saint on a secret, and secrets can be found. So, a decision was made at a level far above me." Remigus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. "What decision?" "To strengthen the foundation," Valdis whispered, "by adding a new, deeper layer of truth beneath the old lie. A contingency. Should the miracle of Elanor ever be questioned again by radicals or external forces, there will be another, older truth to retreat to. One so horrific, so definitive, it would make any questioning of the current myth seem like blasphemous nitpicking." "What have you done?" Remigus's grip tightened on the cylinder. "What was necessary," Valdis said, his face a mask of miserable resolve. "The original logs from Sethrys are gone, by your hand, but my office has just discovered a fragment of a much older record predating the official hagiography. It will be sealed in a vault deeper than the one you visited, known only to a few. It tells a darker tale." He leaned closer, his breath a ghost on Remigus's ear. "It says Elanor did hear a voice from the warp that day, but it was not the God Emperor, it was a trick of the ruinous powers. Her sacrifice was a ritual that momentarily stayed the daemon, but at the cost of binding its essence to the circlet, creating a latent psychic weapon. The saint is a sleeper agent, a Trojan horse of chaos waiting to be activated. The Imperial cult's veneration is the only thing containing it." Remigus stared at him, a nausea rising in his gut. It was genius. It was monstrous. It was the most grimdark truth imaginable. If the beautiful lie was ever threatened, they would release this horrific one, discrediting all inquiry. Who would dare question a saint if the alternative was believing she was a demonic pawn? Faith would be reinforced through terror. "You've made her into everything she fought against," Remigus breathed. "I have ensured her story, in whatever form, will forever serve the Imperium," Valdis corrected. He took a step back, his duty done. "The cylinder. It is a copy of the new truth. The original is already buried. Now you hold it too. Not to share, but to understand the depth of the well. To understand why you must never ever speak." Valdis melted back into the crowd, leaving Remigus standing frozen, the warm cylinder like a live grenade in his hand. The freighter voyage was a blur of grey metal and grumbling crew. Remigus secured a solitary cell, and only there, in the absolute darkness, shielded by the ship's hull from the gaze of the Astronomicon and any other prying senses, did he open the cylinder. A microslate activated. It contained a single file, a masterfully forged record. It used archaic code structures, artificial data corrosion, and layered linguistic anachronisms that would pass any but the most insane level of scrutiny. It depicted Elanor not as a commander, but as a desperate psyker, making a pact with the Whispering Shadows to save her people, damning herself in the process. It was a masterpiece of historical forgery, a black foundation. He deleted it. He scoured the slate. But it didn't matter. The record was in his head now too, another layer in his personal archive. The true truth of Sethrys, and now the false, darker truth of the Sanctum, both lived in him, a dissonant chord that would never resolve. Years passed. The Archive Monastery of Solitude was exactly as advertised, silent, cold, and pointless. He processed reports on mineral densities and stellar static. He spoke only when necessary, to servitors and to the aged, broken-down archivists who were his companions in exile. He became a ghost among ghosts. He often found himself in the monastery's lone, unadorned observation bay, looking out at the dead rock of Lyra III and the endless starfield. He was waiting, though he did not know for what. For a sign? For a release? For his own mind to finally crack under the weight of dual, opposing truths? One night, during the silent hours, a new archivist was delivered. A young woman, her head shaved, her eyes holding the stunned, hollow look of one whose certainties had been recently incinerated. Her name was Kaya. She said little, but she worked with a fierce, desperate concentration, as if trying to compute an unsolvable equation. Weeks later, he found her in the observation bay, weeping silently. He did not offer comfort, he simply stood beside her, sharing the void. "They told me my research was heretical," she finally said, her voice raw. "I was correlating accounts of pre-imperial folk heroes on 3 separate worlds. I found parallels, patterns of self-sacrifice, of collective courage overcoming existential threats. I suggested the imperial cult's hagiographies might be refined versions of these older human stories, that the divine light might be a metaphor for our own latent strength." Remigus's heart, long dormant, gave a single, painful thud. He saw Elanor walking into the silvering dark of Sethrys, powered by nothing but the defiant love of those beside her. "They called it the sin of mortal pride," Kaya whispered. "They burned my work. They sent me here." He looked at her, this young, broken truth seeker, and saw the ghost of his own future, and the ghost of a past he could never mention. The war was not over. It was fractal, repeating in every generation, in every inquisitive mind. He made a decision. Not to tell her the truth of Sethrys, that would be a death sentence for her, but to give her a weapon, a different kind of truth. "The patterns you saw," he said, his voice rough from disuse, "they are real. Remember that. But know this, the Imperium does not fear your truth because it is false. It fears it because it is powerful. A powerful truth must be controlled, chained, or buried under a mountain of louder, simpler stories. Your duty now is not to speak it. Your duty is to remember it, to keep it alive here." He tapped his temple, the same gesture Valdis had once used. "The archive of the mind is the last fortress that cannot be razed." She looked at him, confusion and a faint, defiant spark in her eyes. To what end? He turned back to the stars, to the infinite, silent dark between them where truths and lies swirled in eternal conflict. "So that when the cage finally cracks," he said, the words of Elanor Vant and his own conviction merging into one, "someone will remember what the bridge looked like." He stood vigil with her in the silence, 2 archivists of forbidden history, guarding their fragile human lights against the vast, encompassing dark. Decades are thin, gauzy things in the timeless chill of an archive moon. They pass not in seasons, but in the slow accretion of dust on data stacks, the incremental decay of aging servitors, and the silent, permanent frost on the observation bayports. Remigus watched his reflection in the diamond pane grow gaunt, his hair the color of the lunar regolith outside. The young archivist, Kaya, grew from a hollow-eyed novice into a woman of sharp, quiet competence, her heresy sanded down into a patient, watchful resilience. They rarely spoke of their pasts. Their communication was in shared duties, in the careful preservation of meaningless data, in the unacknowledged understanding that they were both living tombs. The war in Remigus's mind never ceased. The dual truths, the empathetic sacrifice of Sethrys, and the manufactured daemonic pact circled each other like stars in a binary system, locked in a gravitational dance that warped his every quiet moment. He dreamed in silver light and bureaucratic Gothic script. He would sometimes catch himself reciting supply manifests from a war 6,000 years gone, or the forged confession of a psyker who never existed. He was the last battlefield of a conflict no one else remembered. The message from the outside world, when it came, was as subtle as a tumor. It arrived not as a transmission, but as a sealed data casket, delivered by a Navy courier whose uniform was too crisp, his bearing too rigid for a simple mail run. The casket bore no official seal, only a small etched symbol, a key crossed by a sword, Magister Valdis's sigil. It was addressed to Remigus. Kaya brought it to him in the deep stacks, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes wary. It has no clearance codes. It bypassed the abbot's scrutiny. He took the casket. It was cold, heavier than it should be. Dread, an old companion, settled in his stomach. He waited until the depths of the sleep cycle, in the absolute solitude of his cell, to open it. Inside was a simple data slate and a single sheet of real parchment. The parchment contained a short message in Valdis's precise hand. The Foundation is being stress tested. Questions are being asked in new quarters. The narrative holds, but the contingency may soon be required. You are the only other living witness to the source material. Your presence and your silence may soon be requested at a higher forum. Prepare yourself. The truth is not a shield, it is a scalpel, and they intend to perform surgery on the soul of the Imperium. V. The slate contained a single file, a security-ciphered summary of events happening light years away. A radical sect of the Inquisition, the iterators of veracity, had grown powerful in the Segmentum Solar. They professed a dangerous ideology, that the Imperium's strength was being sapped not by a lack of faith, but by the accumulated weight of its own comforting falsehoods. They sought to purge the record, to purge the rot, believing that only by confronting the darkest, most brutal truths of its history could humanity evolve a stronger, more resilient creed. They were, the report noted, gaining sympathetic ears amongst certain disillusioned Martian factions and even some rogue elements of the Adeptus Custodes. And their first major target, the summary chillingly noted, was the mythologized infancy of the Imperial cult. They were picking at the thread of the first saint. Valdis's new, horrific forgery, the demonic pact, was the shield. But to wield it, the shield bearers might need to consult the one man who had touched the original wound. They would come for him, not to kill him, but to dissect his memories, to use the ghost of Elanor Vant as a mere data point in an ideological war he wanted no part of. He destroyed the parchment, he scrubbed the slate, but the knowledge remained. He was no longer just an archive, he was a resource to be mined. He found Kaya in the observatory, as he knew he would. She was charting the faint, anomalous energy signatures from a nearby nebula, a useless but consuming task. He did not sit. "They're coming for me," he said, his voice flat in the thin air. She did not look up from her scopes. "Who?" "The past, wearing new masks." He leaned against the cold viewport. "There is a thing I have never told you, a specific weight I carry. It is the reason I am here. Soon, men with absolute authority will arrive to take that weight from my mind by any means necessary. They will use it to fight a war about the nature of truth itself." Now she turned, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the star chart. "What is the weight?" he told her. "Not the full immersive memory, but the shape of it. A world called Sethrys, a commander named Elanor, a sacrifice born of human solidarity, not divine will, and the monstrous lie crafted to protect the beautiful one." He spoke for only a few minutes, but in that sterile room, it felt like reciting an entire epic of loss. Kaya listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a long time, staring at her hands. "So the first saint was a heretic," she finally said. "No," Remigus replied, with more force than he intended. "She was a human. That is the heresy. And that is the truth they cannot allow to exist, in any form. They would rather believe, and make everyone believe, that she was a daemon's pawn, because a daemon can be hated, feared, and contained. A human with the power to reflect the dark back on itself through simple courage, that is an idea that cannot be controlled. And you have held this idea inside you all these years. It has held me, he corrected. She stood, walking to the viewport to stand beside him. The nebula outside cast a faint, eerie light on her face. What will you do when they come? I will tell them nothing. They will rip it from me anyway. They have tools to unspool a man's consciousness like a scroll. He looked at her, a decision crystallizing. But they have no interest in you. Your heresy is small, mundane. After I am gone, you will likely be left here to continue the work. He saw the understanding dawn in her eyes, followed by rebellion. You want me to become the archive after you? No, I want you to survive. But if you should, by chance, remember a story, an old apocryphal fable about a bridge made of mortal courage and a cage made of golden lies, keep it to yourself until the galaxy is brave enough to hear it, or until it dies with you. He was asking her to take up his curse, to become the next link in a chain of silent witnesses stretching back to a bunker on a dead world. It was a terrible thing to ask. He saw the conflict tear at her, the scholar's desire to preserve, warring with the survival instinct to remain small and forgotten. Before she could answer, the station's ancient, rarely used alarm gave a single, jarring blare. It was not for internal failure, it was the priority ingress alert. They both looked towards the main bay. Through the observation slits, they saw the running lights of a ship, sharp and aggressive, unlike the bloated freighters or worn Navy monitors that usually visited. It was a lance-shaped vessel, gunmetal grey, devoid of markings. It moved with silent, predatory grace, docking directly with the monastery's primary airlock. No request for clearance. No announcement. They had come far sooner than he had anticipated. The iterators? Kaya whispered, her face pale. Or the grey agents one last time, Remigus said. He felt a strange calm. The waiting was over. Go to the deep stacks. Continue your work. You saw nothing, you know nothing of me beyond my name and duty. Remigus, go. His voice held the ghost of command he had not used in decades. She hesitated for one more second, her eyes holding his, a silent pact forming in the space between them. Then she turned and fled into the labyrinth of shelves and data stacks. Remigus did not go to the airlock. He returned to his cell. He sat on his cot, straightened his threadbare robes, and waited. He focused his mind not on resistance, but on consolidation. He brought the memory of Sethrys to the forefront, the taste of fear, the sound of Eleanor's voice, the warmth of a shared resolve. He wrapped the forged lie of the demonic pact around it like a shroud. He would give them both, tangled together. Let them try to separate the light from the darkness. Let them see that in the deepest truths, they are often the same thing. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed in the stone corridor outside. They stopped at his door. It was not the hesitant shuffle of a servitor or the measured tread of the abbot. This was the sound of purpose clad in ceramite and certainty. The door opened, not with a code key, but with the screech of sheared metal as the lock was forced. The figure that filled the doorway was not a grey agent. It was taller, broader, clad in massive, ornate power armor, the color of blood and midnight. Its helm was a grotesque fusion of skull and rebreather, one eye lens a baleful red. On one massive pauldron was the unmistakable symbol of the Inquisition. On the other, a new icon, a stylized eye, slit like a keyhole. An inquisitor of the Ordo, but of the radical Iterator sect. The surgery on the Imperium's soul had arrived, and its instrument was a warrior priest of terrifying aspect. The giant figure looked down at the frail archivist on the cot. A synthesized voice, deep and hollow, echoed in the small room. Remigus, former curator, fabricant of the Pacificus archives. You are summoned. You have a truth within you. The Imperium has need of it. Remigus looked up, meeting the red eye lens. He saw no fanaticism there, only a cold, calculating hunger. This was not about faith, it was about power, the power of a truth that could break worlds. I have many truths, Remigus said, his voice steady. Which one do you require? The Inquisitor leaned forward, the armor whirring. The first one. The one that started all the others. The one that lives in silver light and whispers of bridges. You will give it to us, willingly or woven from your pain. Remigus offered a thin, weary smile. The smile of a man who has already lost everything but the core of what he is. Then let us begin, he said, and may the Emperor have mercy on us all. He closed his eyes, not in prayer, but in focus. He reached for the memory, not to hide it, but to present it in all its terrible, contradictory glory. The final archive was opening. The Inquisitor's ship was called the Veritas Lux, Truth and Light. The irony was not lost on Remigus as he was escorted, not to a cell, but to a contemplatorium deep within its hull. The room was circular, lined with dark wood and shelves of real, leather-bound books, a startling luxury. A single lumen globe cast a pool of soft light on a central table of polished obsidian. It felt less like an interrogation chamber and more like a scholar's study. The menace here was not of chains and pain grogs, but of profound, unsettling erudition. The Inquisitor, he had given his name as Thorn, removed his helmet. His face was a surprise. He was not old, but neither was he young. His features were sharp, intellectual, etched with fine lines of concentration rather than brutality. His eyes were a pale, penetrating grey. He moved with a scholar's precision, not a warrior's swagger. "Sit, Curator Fabricant," Thorn said, his natural voice a quiet, resonant baritone. He gestured to a chair. "You will not be harmed. I have no need for crude methods. The truth resists torture. It folds in on itself, creates defensive fictions. I require clarity, not confession." Remigus sat, placing his hands on the cool table. "You seek clarity on a subject the Officio Monstrosa has declared opaque. That is a dangerous pursuit." "The Monstrosa, as you call the agents of the seal, are preservers," Thorn said, taking the seat opposite. He produced a crystal decanter and 2 glasses, pouring a deep amasec. "They are curators of a static truth. I am an archaeologist of a dynamic one. They believe the past is a fortress to be maintained. I believe it is a foundation to be built upon. We both serve the Imperium's survival. Our methodologies diverge." He pushed a glass toward Remigus. "The story of Saint Elanor, the Calthos miracle."
A cornerstone of the Imperial Creed for 6 millennia, the Seal's agents reported a perturbation at the shrine. An echo. You were there, you interacted with it, and you left with an understanding that could not purge. I have read Magister Valdus' sealed reports. I know of the world called Sethrys. So, Valdus' files have been breached. The foundations were indeed being stress-tested. Remigus sipped the amasec. It was exquisite, tasting of smoke and distant forests, a bribe or a gesture of respect between professionals. "You know what Valdus wanted you to know," Remigus said carefully. "He created a contingency, a darker truth to protect the bright lie. The demonic pact forgery." Thorn nodded, a flicker of disdain in his eyes. "A blunt instrument, effective in its way, but intellectually bankrupt. It does not seek to understand, only to silence. I am not interested in forgeries. I am interested in the raw signal, before the noise of doctrine was applied. You have that signal. You recited it to the echo. You calmed a warp event with historical fact, a fascinating precedent." Remigus felt the walls of the conversation closing in. This man was not a brute. He was a philosopher with an army, more dangerous by far. The raw signal, as you call it, is mimetically hazardous. It nearly destroyed a cathedral because it was trapped in a resonant loop, fighting the narrative built around it. Thorn leaned forward, his pale eyes alight. "Don't you see? The trauma wasn't the event itself, it was the disconnect. The truth of a human act of supreme solidarity was imprisoned inside a story of divine intervention. The cognitive dissonance created a psychic fault line. You didn't calm it with fact, Remigus. You healed it by reconciling it with its own history. You allowed the memory to be whole." He stood, pacing slowly. "The Imperium is riddled with such fault lines. Every saint, every founding myth, every divine mandate is a potential psychic scar, because they are all built on simplified, weaponized versions of messier human truths. These scars weaken us. They make our faith brittle, because subconsciously, on a species-wide level, we sense the lie. My order believes that by carefully, surgically exposing the foundational truths, human courage, the tragic costs, the complex decisions can't heal those scars. We can't build a faith not on blind obedience to fairy tales, but on a clear-eyed understanding of our own horrific, magnificent history, a faith that is resilient because it is real." It was a terrifying, beautiful vision, and it was utter heresy. It sought to replace the bedrock of the Imperial Creed with shifting sands of historical ambiguity. And you wish to start with the first saint, Remigus said. The first crack is often the deepest, Thorn said, stopping his pace. I want you to give me Sethrys, not as a story, but as a data set, every sensory detail from the logs, every emotional nuance from the echo. I will cross-reference it with every surviving shred of data from that Airfleet manifests, planetary surveys, personal diaries of common soldiers if I can find them. I will rebuild the event, not as hagiography, but as history, and then I will present it. To whom, and to what end? You will cause a civil war in the faith. To the right people, in the right context, Thorn said, his fervor cooling into icy calculation. The galaxy is burning, Remigus. The cicatrix maledictum has split reality. We are losing. Blind faith in sanitized legends is not enough anymore. We need a faith that understands sacrifice because it has stared into the true cost. We need soldiers who fight not because a saint performed a miracle, but because they understand that ordinary humans, through collective will, can perform miracles of their own. I am not destroying the cult. I am trying to evolve it into something that can survive the darkness ahead. He was sincere. That was the most frightening thing. He believed he was saving the Imperium by dismantling its core narrative. And if you're wrong, Remigus asked softly, if the truth, as you say, is a scalpel, what if the patient cannot survive the surgery? What if humanity needs the golden light to stand against the dark? What if the simple, beautiful story of Saint Elanor is the only thing that gives a dying guardsman on 1,000 worlds the courage to hold the line? Thorn met his gaze, and we will have died with our eyes open, rather than lived with them shut. But I do not believe that. I believe humanity is stronger than the monstros it gives it credit for. He returned to his seat. I am not asking you to publicly proclaim anything. I am asking you to work with me, in this room, to be the key witness, the primary source. Help me build the true history of Sethrys. Your expertise is unparalleled. Your memory is the only remaining vessel. It was an offer of purpose, of profound significance, after a lifetime of silent exile.